Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chainy podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Cheney, and I'm super excited to have Gary Master on today to talk to us about media and the supply chain, and maybe talk a little bit about events as well. These are both topics that myself personally am getting a little bit more involved with these days as I try to build out Supply Chainy, and I have this podcast and YouTube and try to do some event stuff. And so I'm really excited to hear from the pros here exactly how it's supposed to be done. So Gary, could you do a little bit better introduction of yourself than I just did?
Sure, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, thanks for having me. So I'm Gary Master, and I'm the CEO of AGiLE Business Media and Events. And so you're talking about media and events. Here we go.
Here we go. Here we go. Well, can you talk a little bit about how you got started? Like, take us back to childhood days. Did you ever see yourself becoming, something that has to do with something supply chain? And how did we get to having this conversation today?
That's a great question. So I grew up, I was the first one in my extended family to go to college. First one.
Wow.
And so I got out of college. I had a business economics degree, and I thought I was going to work at the Fed. I thought I would one day run the Fed. You have those childhood dreams. And a gentleman who worked in supply chain had an ad in the paper for a part-time job. And I said, I'll never do that. 6 months later, I couldn't find work. I said, I should go back and see if that ad's still around. And sure enough, I answered it. He was in supply chain, and he was a management consultant. And I ended up working for him and then taking over the business and consulting for 280 different companies in supply chain. That's my story. Once you get in supply chain, you can never leave. You can change cards, but you're stuck. And then we had a chance to launch a media property. My friend Mitch, MacDonald, and Jim Indelicato, we got together and said, hey, the media side of things in supply chain doesn't really talk about distribution centers. It doesn't really talk about the fillet of the meal, which is distribution centers. And we said, yeah, let's do that. And we decided to start a media company right in the middle of a recession. And everybody said, you'll never make it. You'll never succeed. But if you do, a year from now, give me a call and maybe we'll advertise. And that was a long time ago.
Wow. Okay. So you went from practitioner, helping businesses with their supply chain needs on the from a consulting perspective, and then was like, hey, there's nobody out there doing a great job of marketing and promoting and creating content. I guess what we'd call it today. That probably wasn't the word at the time, I guess. Can you talk a little bit more about those early days? What kind of lessons did you have? Any good stories coming out of those early days?
We had some great stories. So we did like a road show across the country. We're going, hey, we have all this experience, we have everything else, and it was great. And we went and we met with an individual down in Georgia, and the individual goes, I really like you. We've done some projects together. I trust you, but this whole thing, starting a media company and starting a magazine in the middle of a recession, he goes, that's not well thought out. He goes, I don't think I'm going to be with you guys, but in a year, if you're still around, I will advertise. And so we made it for the first year. I went back to him and I said, I'm here. And he was like, you made it, didn't you? And I go, yeah. So he did end up advertising with us. And in those early days, when we started, that was back in 2003. So in 2003 was our first issue. We had a lot of print media, and digital was kind of like was just starting to start up with webcasts and all that kind of good stuff. I remember when we started going out and getting some of our first advertisers. So we had a launch party. We had a launch party at the Liz Taylor Suite in top of the John Hancock. And so one of our advertisers allowed us to use the facility. It had a fire code of 230. And about a half an hour into our party, we had over 700 people in the room.
Wow.
And I remember the band was playing, and Tony Ocean was playing. And the next thing you know, somebody spilled an alcoholic beverage, and then somebody knocked over a candle, and we had a fire.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so when our launch party was a huge success,
Yeah.
everybody's going
It was hot.
around ProMat the next day, and they're going, these guys are great. Man, that was so much fun.
Wow.
Until we saw the bill for the 4 times appetizers. And usually when you go through three rounds of appetizers, they're usually fairly priced. That 4th round is the one that kills you. So when we saw the bill, we were like, wow, that was a lot of fun, but maybe not do that again for a little while.
Yeah, yeah. But you got tons of visibility, and you probably couldn't have gotten better, yeah,
We had
publicity from that.
we had the who's who of the space. They were there. They were at the party and they had a good time. It was fun.
As a practitioner, how were you the brains behind it, and someone else brought the artistic and photography and videography components, or and visuals, or how did that kind of work out?
So my business partner, Mitch MacDonald, had an editorial background. So he was the editor. He was the guy that did all the writing and hiring the editorial staff. I was the guy that was on the sales and marketing side and some of the operations. And so we divided and conquered along those lines. And I'm also a storyteller on the side. So it's like I love to talk story about. Sorry, I spent 8 years in Hawaii, so I use the phrase talk story. I did a lot of sales and marketing for the company, and he did a lot of the editorial work and developing the brand from an editorial perspective.
So you kind of alluded to the fact that there weren't a lot of, it seems like there weren't a lot of competitors at the time, maybe, that you were starting this, and that was kind of the impetus for starting it in the first place, right? Is that it was kind of a blank canvas. How has that competitive scene kind of evolved over the years, as you've been there
It's
and
kind
as
of
you've been
funny.
building this?
When you have a good idea in this world, in a competitive marketplace and in a free market, right? You have a good idea, a lot of folks will then follow that idea. So when we first came out with DC Velocity, we were designed to reach distribution centers, people at the corporate level, and distribution centers. And so nobody else had that strategy particularly. And then all of a sudden, about 6 months to a year later, a lot of folks had a strategy reaching distribution centers. So the landscape evolved over time, and then we added a second publication after that, working with CSCMP. And then we are also doing, an event as well with CSCMP, and we do events. So we evolved from print manifestation of content to webcasts to podcasts to videography to you name it, to our websites being robust and content delivery being from in a print once a month to daily, news updates and so forth via our website.
And all focused on supply chain and warehousing and whatnot, which, as you can tell, I'm a pretty big fan of. So I appreciate what you all do to bring intelligence, keep us apprised of what's going on in the market. What about the communication, the speed of communication and information? I would be interested to hear about how that has changed. I would imagine before it was like there's a news story, we'll go and publish about it 2 weeks from now, and everyone in the industry will learn about it by the time it's old news, basically, right? And then
Yeah.
I would imagine now it's, hey, something just happened. There's a big ship stuck in a canal out in the Middle East. We're going to be talking about this in 2 minutes, right? Can you talk a little about that just pace of information flow and communication?
That is great because when you used to live in a print world primarily, right? You could have the ship stuck in the canal and you're going, okay, what ship is it? What does this mean to everybody? And you had time to develop the story, right? Because you might print it a month or 2 weeks from now. Now it's, wait a minute, there's a ship stuck where? Okay, how do I get somebody on the phone like right now? And how do I get this pushed out right now? And are we going to do a social media post about it? Or are we going to do it on put it in an email newsletter that's going in 20 minutes? How's that going to get to our audience and to our readers right now? We believe in making the world a better place, one supply chain at a time. So what we need to do is, in order to fulfill that mission, we need to really think about making sure we have accurate information, but speedy. And sometimes putting those two together is tricky.
It's a balancing act, I suppose.
It is. It really is.
And so the pace of communication and everything is increasing, and also I guess the variety of channels that you need to push information through is increasing, and so as an organization, you've undoubtedly had to evolve and learn new strategies, bring on new capabilities and talents and skills, and to where you've got someone on staff that can handle all the different sort of mediums and speak all the different languages.
That's right. We got somebody that handles our social media. We have somebody that handles our videography. We have somebody that handles our writing for print. Somebody that handles our digital content development and strategies. And we've had to train our team to go from once a month to daily content creation. And the print magazine comes from the news as opposed to the news is fit around the print. And so it was upside down, and it was really a cool journey to change the way that content is delivered and in timely, manner.
And you've had to, because the advertising dollars where your customers need to spend and where they want to, the places they want to be at have been changing. And you kind of as the provider of that platform and whatnot, you've needed to be there in lockstep as much as possible, I guess, and stay with them and deliver the
That's
solutions
right.
they're looking for.
I mean, what everybody wanted in the past was branding, and they wanted to brand, brand, brand. Today, it's like, how do you get me leads? How do you get me lead gen? How do you help me fill my pipeline? How do you help me do that and show me as a thought leader? So, thought leadership and lead generation are the two things that our customers want today, and that's the one thing we want to give them. So,
And from a very data heavy sort of environment that we live in today, there's, I would imagine, expectation that there's metrics and ROI and sort of engagement stuff. And you've probably had to pioneer and be at the cutting edge of that to be able to deliver, here's what we're bringing you as a result of the exposure we're giving you. Can you talk a little about that evolution?
yeah, so you go from a print world where you run an ad in the magazine, right? Maybe even on a monthly basis. And maybe you do a survey beforehand and a survey after your campaign. You can show how your brand awareness has changed. Now all of a sudden it's like you're running something maybe a couple times a day and you're given metrics on everything that runs on the digital side, and you're showing open rates, you're showing engagement levels, and you're showing potential ROI, and then you're doing lead gen, and folks are calling those names, making sure your list is up to date, making sure, and if it's not, they let you know in a hurry. Feedback's immediate. And the one that's really changing is the whole privacy of information for consumers. Now you've got to worry about California-based legislation. You got to worry about GDPR. You got to worry about all those types of legislations going on, and you've got to make sure that you comply with it while developing quality content in a quick fashion and delivering it to the right way, all within compliance to government standards.
That's a lot. That's a lot to juggle. Um,
It's kind of like the
Speaking of,
supply chain, you know. You got the whole omni-channel thing that started, and customer demands, they went up and through the roof, their expectations, and then everybody's squeezed on the profit margins, and they're like, do more, do more, do it with less. So we get it, we understand it.
can you talk a little bit about the transition from print and publication and advertising into events?
Yeah, so different worlds, right? So with print and digital, you basically are somewhat transactional and you develop relationships with your customers. But on the entire event side, much, much different process. Um, the event world is about an experience in person as opposed to a webcast or print media, making content so that it is relatable, understandable, digestible, and also you can take things away from it at the end of the day so that you can go back to the office and say, I got this, I got this, I got this. But what we found out is there's got to be a balance with events of experience has got to be good, it's got to be fun, got to be engaging, but you need to provide value when they come and they spend the time in traveling to an event and spending money on registration. You got to provide, information that really hits home. It's meaningful to them.
Back to my comment earlier then about there being a need to have data sort of support that decision and return on that investment in time of traveling out to a conference and spending time away from the office. If you're in sales, the amount of sales and contacts you got there better be more than what you could have gotten sitting behind the phone in the office, whatnot, right?
That's right. And the other side of it too is I think one thing is sometimes overlooked but always discussed is the networking aspect. A lot of companies say networking and they say, okay, I better get leads and I better get lead development. But the networking that happens at events, and it's not just our events, it's events across the spectrum, is also an opportunity for career path development. Let's just be brutally honest. When folks go to careers, they meet new people, they meet and learn of new opportunities, and they can grow their careers besides just developing leads and pipelines and all that kind of stuff.
Right. You're going to get exposure to people and faces and places that you don't when you're sitting in Dallas, Texas, doing your 9 to 5, right?
That's right.
What have you seen in sort of the composition of events and conferences. How have those evolved over time to kind of get to where they are today? And what's the state of the art sort of conference of today have?
So there's been a lot of change, right? But where we're at with events today is companies want to hear from their peers. They also want to hear from the practitioner side of things and not just solution providers. And the practitioners have 3 or 4 or maybe as many as 5 conferences they could go to in a year. So there's a tremendous amount of competition on, if I'm a practitioner, what shows do I go to? And if I'm the boss of a supply chain leader, where do I allocate T&E for that person to go to and time away from the office or away from the operation to go to? I think there's a huge competition right now of, if I attend an event from a practitioner side, am I going to get the education that I want? Am I going to walk away learning some strategic things that I can implement in my operation when I leave? Am I going to meet some people and maybe network and develop a network of folks that I could go to and I could call upon them when I've got challenges? And so that is and then some of these folks don't even have budgets. We're talking about some billion-dollar companies that don't have a budget to send their folks to conferences. And so you have to think about, how do you get them there? How do you attract them? And how do you incentivize them to come when they don't have a budget to come? And so we're about, trying to do that.
Wow, that's something I never would have considered. I know that from my perspective, I've attended, Edge conferences and other conferences as part of a big company that sent a group of us out, and kind of just took that on as part of the cost of developing and continually educating, part of that supply chain team in the business to know what's going on out there, have contacts, have some opportunities to find new suppliers and see some new ideas. And so it's surprising to hear that not everyone has that same sort of thought process.
Yeah, one of the things that we've tried to do, particularly like with Edge this year, is we've tried to stack a program that starts with energy and ends with takeaways. And it's loaded with content in between and networking and fun. So we start with like a Morris Morrison, who's a futurist, and he's a high energy individual. And he just kicks us off with what's going on in the future. And he just right in your face, like in a good way of like, this is a wake up call. But then we go to Fawn Weaver, who does the Uncle Nearest brands. She's CEO of the Uncle Nearest brands. She's a phenomenal leader. She's a great speaker. She's got a great story. And then to have fun, we're going to do some whiskey tasting with her. So she's going to talk on the main stage, but she's going to bring some of her whiskey. We've got Roberto Isaias from Mattel. He's going to be talking about some of the Barbie story and the supply chain behind Barbie. When you have a Barbie movie that goes so hot and all of a sudden Barbie's hot, how do you deliver that when it comes and it happens overnight? And then we have also got Shelley Simpson, who is the CEO of JB Hunt, and Shelley's a phenomenal leader too. So we pack it with that. But then we don't forget about the fun part too. So Tuesday night, we've got, like in Nashville at the Gaylord, we've got the whole Delta Island. And so we're putting together a big party with 2 bands. You got waterfalls, you got relaxation, music, and it's networking. And so you get to network, you get educated, you get enthused. You got to deliver the whole package. And that's what we're trying to do.
It sounds a little bit like Disney World for adults.
It is. And it is. That's
or
true,
supply chain
right?
nerds. Yeah.
You put some real education in the Disney package, and there you go.
Right.
There's Edge.
Right. Yeah, that's good. You gotta feed, both the mental, the mind, and kind of body and spirit and everything all at once. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about the keynote speakers and the special presenters that you have this year. I know that you've been involved with it for a few years. Is there one particular speaker or presenter in the past that is just like was on your bucket list of people to meet, or just like stands out to you?
Yeah. So right after COVID, literally one of the first events to be had right after COVID, we were in Atlanta, Georgia, and we had Pfizer come and speak. And they talked about the supply chain of vaccinations. And they talked about the details of it. And no one knows. It was almost like a wartime effort. It was an incredible story of a supply chain that was really delivered in a pinch. And that Pfizer story was so enthralling for me. It was great. I had goosebumps because I'm big into supply chain. I'm going, we did it. Some people didn't get toilet paper, some people didn't get their wipes when they needed it, but we did it. The vaccinations went out.
Wow, I could imagine that would have been pretty inspiring to have been in that crowd. And you'd also, with it being kind of right after COVID, you had the braver audience there that was kind of the first ones coming back out, going into in person.
We did.
Yeah, yeah, those are the people ready to get back out.
And when you're in person, because you asked what's the in person like from the print media, when you're doing webcasts, you don't have masks on. But that first one out, we were all wearing masks, right? So we had to hear, why are you making me wear a mask? Or why doesn't he or she have a mask on? So but that Pfizer message was unifying. It was really cool.
The crazy thing for me is during COVID time, I always had this fear in the back of my head that we would never shake hands again or ever have more than one person in an elevator again. And it's kind of amazing to stand here, a couple of years on the other side of it and say like, no, we're kind of back, like we're shaking hands and whatnot again, and everything's a little bit back to normal. But back in those days, it was hard to imagine kind of coming back from that.
It was. It was. I had one person tell me on the phone, you're actually going to have this event. And like, yeah, we're going to have the event. You're going to kill people. You're a killer. And I go, I don't classify myself as that. No, I'm not a killer. I've never killed anybody. But it was that, it was that passionate. It was the discussions that were being had. You're right.
Maybe on a lighter note, let's talk maybe a little bit about you as a person. Whenever people come up onto the podcast, we always talk a lot of shop and whatnot.
Sure.
But who is Gary outside of AGiLE Business Media and Events?
I'm the same guy. I'm a transparent individual that truly believes in making the world a better place, one supply chain at a time. And what that looks like is I love networking with people. I love talking story. I love to know what's going on in their life and how I can help them personally, not just from a business perspective. And that's who I am. I mean, I've got 4 kids, 3 are married. We got grandkids. So we've got a family, and I treat everybody like family. I really do.
Excellent. And it turns out you're actually kind of my neighbor up here in the DFW area as well, right? So
that's right.
yeah,
Love living here.
How have you seen, you've kind of talked about how whenever you were first starting, everything was kind of, the concept of supply chain as a profession was probably just in its infancy. And today, especially with COVID, like, I had a podcast guest the other day who said, my parents didn't know what I do. They never knew what I did until COVID happened. And then they're like, oh, that's supply chain. Okay. From your perspective, can you kind of comment a little bit on just the progress of supply chain management as a career, as a profession, as a science?
So supply chain, you're right. When you would talk about supply chain years ago, everybody just have an out of body experience. Their eyes would glaze over, and they're going, "What the heck is that?" I mean, I don't even care. And then all of a sudden, this thing like COVID hits, or maybe back to back to back winter storms, and then all of a sudden you go from no one knows what the supply chain is to you're in a grocery store and it's COVID and there's no eggs and milk, and you hear people going, it's the darn supply chain again. So you went from, no one understood what it was to everybody being a supply chain expert. And I think in the middle of it, we had this brief time, which was really cool. And it was Amazon. And they started their campaigns where they showed conveyor operating in DCs. And they talked about it and showed it, and they said, and people started to understand, oh, that's supply chain. And supply chain got to a point where it was actually referred to by some as, hey, that's pretty sexy, all that technology and stuff. So I spoke at an event, it was an apparel event, and I said, all right, how many of you think supply chain's sexy? And like 2 people in the room raised their hands. And I go, that does it. Now, I don't recommend this. I threw my iPad down. I shouldn't have done that because I could have heard it. But I threw it down. I go, well, there you have it. If nobody thinks it's sexy, why are we even here to talk about how we can better our supply chains? And so the group I was with actually printed up, is your supply chain sexy on shirts? but we went from not understand what supply chain was, to it was sexy and Amazon helped us get there, and then to, oh my goodness, everything is the supply chain's fault. And now we're back to, hey, our supply chains did deliver and we like everybody and it's all good. So it's been kind
Yeah.
of interesting, the journey.
Double the publicity has been a double-edged sword of sorts then, because now
Yeah.
we're the scapegoat for anything whenever things go wrong. So I usually like to try to get some comments from all the guests on suggestions or tips that they have for those folks that are in business school right now. Maybe they're thinking about going the supply chain route and whatnot. Is there any tips or advice you would give them as far as certificates, courses to take, areas to focus on that will kind of keep them and put them in the best position possible for their career in supply chain?
Could I start with the military first?
Go for it.
So I was involved with the program for the military at a conference where we had some vets come in. They were transitioning out of the military into the real world, and they were from the Army, and they had seen combat. And we kind of took some of them under our wings. I bring this story up because I want you to walk through the life of an individual where we as a country have entrusted them with millions of dollars of equipment to run and to protect our country. And so they're now walking into a feeding frenzy of several thousand people. And I'm introducing them to some of my key contacts, and they're all going, so what do you do? And they don't know how to answer the question. Well, I was in the Army, and they're like, oh. And I remember one individual, he goes, how do I answer that? And I said, start by going to that president of the company and saying, so what are you looking for? I'm a veteran. I serve this country. What are you looking for in your company? Oh, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. Oh, I could do that. How can you do that? That individual that I did that with at that conference got a lot of different job offers after that conference. And I will never forget it. It was just ingrained into me. So when we deal with students or we have students come, if you're a student and you're watching this, come to the EDGE conference, go to another conference in supply chain, attend it, network, and ask questions. Learn what you can't learn in the book or on the internet. Learn in person in how to network and where you fit in life. And so just like that individual that didn't know how to fit, a second guy that was with us, what's that interaction in the military? I had a panel discussion. And everybody goes, well, labor's a problem for us. I said, we have a gentleman at the back of the room that is available. And they go, yeah, but he's going to want $130,000 and he's going to want a VP. He goes, no, he goes, I'll drive a lift truck. Everybody turned around in the room and said, what's your contact information? So it's that simple. It's that networking and getting to know how to communicate. You go to a supply chain career, there's opportunities in supply chain that you don't learn in a classroom. There's so many opportunities that it's amazing. It's an amazing space, amazing industry. And so if you're in supply chain right now, stick with it. If you're in something you don't like, stick with it. There's too many opportunities in supply chain, and we need you desperately because it makes the world a better place. If your supply chain's great, the world's great. If your supply chain's terrible, life is not as good as it could be.
Interesting. I appreciate your commentary on that. I can sympathize or I can relate to the military story. As a manager and a recruiter and whatnot, I've found that hiring veterans is almost always a wise choice because especially in the world of logistics and supply chain where we are so process oriented as is the military, then you can kind of depend that folks already realize that there's a particular structure and way of doing things and that's how you create efficiency and you run supply chains consistently and reliably, right? And so they've already kind of got this mindset and also the teamwork and sort of camaraderie environment where it's not just us, like we're the trucking company, right? But we got the warehouse folks we got to work with, the manufacturing, some other people. And so it takes kind of all of the different branches here to really make the supply chain run and work. And so I really appreciate you taking a second to call that out and kind of highlight that as being, I think a great asset to supply chains is those veterans.
And and I appreciate your comment there because everybody and their brother wants to hire a military logistics person.
Right, right.
So that's the cream of the crop, and everybody focuses on the title. But to your point and what I was saying, there's so much more to it than that.
Where do you see things going? In the media and event space, doesn't even necessarily need to be supply chain, but is there something coming up on the horizon? I realize that
Yeah.
AI is out there, probably pumping out lots of content and making it easy to
Big,
kind of
big
look
battle
like
going on
a
right now. That's a great question. So
yeah.
I'm a big sports guy. So I love like watching things like Bleacher Report and going into and see what's new in the world of sports and so forth. But I consume a lot of content in sports. So everybody wants to be first with a story, or everybody's regurgitating the same story that breaks. And so you see the same story with different headlines, or you see the early breaking story with lots of typos and everything else that drives me crazy. And so I think the battle of what's coming down is there's so much pressure now on less direct reporting and more content being put together and as opposed to just creating it yourself, that there's a lot of pressure to get it out fast and to get it out right. And now you got this thing called AI that's out there, right? And so you got pendulums with AI. You got somebody and I heard somebody say the other day, wow, with AI I could really clean up my operation. In other words, I could get rid of a bunch of people and I can use AI to generate stuff. It's not there yet. It might get there. But rather, I learned the other day is the best run companies are those that their employees know how to best utilize AI. They're not replaced by AI. They know how to best utilize it. And so we ourselves we're going through a big change in our organization on how we use AI and implement it. And we're doing it in a way that's responsible. So our editors create the stories, but they use things like AI to generate maybe the best lead or the best way for Google Analytics to pick something up or something like that. But our stories, we are a trusted resource for accurate reporting and accurate content. And so the best of both breeds, please use AI responsibly is where I'm going. But it's a big topic today in media. It's a huge topic. And sometimes you can trust it and sometimes you can't. And when you can't, it's bad. And that is all across everything from robotics and the supply chain. But on the media space, it's critical because, if you're covering an election right now, man, I'll tell you what, AI can have a big impact on the election.
Yeah, yeah. I like your call out to use it responsibly. There's I've had a founder, CEO of an AI sort of conversite, Ganesh there, and he kind of
Yeah.
talked about how AI is a tool, and also that you should not 100% rely on it to give you absolute truth type of information because of like hallucinations and things that it kind of just infers. And I think interestingly, in a company environment, if you ask this system to say, hey, what are we about to run out of inventory on, and what $1 million POs do we need to cut? If your inquiry is not exactly tuned correctly, it misunderstands something, it kind of garbles something up in there, and it spits out an answer that says, yeah, you need to go cut an expedited PO for these materials and spend buku's amount of dollars. Maybe that wasn't actually all correct. So there, if you don't vet, trust but verify type of thing and use it as a tool with a human at the end of the process making the final decision, then yeah, we could get ourselves in a lot of trouble. As we kind of wrap up, is there one particular topic or subject matter that we haven't covered here today that you're really passionate about, that you want to make sure that every person that you meet, it's kind of something you talk about, and maybe if someone fast forwarded through this entire conversation because they're like, supply chain, who wants to hear more about supply chain, and they just heard this last 1 minute or something, what would you want to leave them with?
Don't be afraid to fail. I used to meet with a lot of execs and get their greatest fears and get what they were really wrestling with. And a lot of execs will say, I've got a big company. I've got one chance. And if I mess it up, I might be gone. Where another large retailer that we shall not mention begins with an A, if they make a couple of mistakes, they have the opportunity to still be in the company and still succeed as a company. But some of these other companies don't. So don't be afraid to fail, because if you're not afraid to fail, you'll live life and you'll adopt at the rate you want to technologies in your organization. If you fight everything because you're afraid, you're just going to get surpassed and you'll lose your job anyways. So don't be afraid to fail.
I like that. I like that. I think there's a similar type of saying, which is if you're not failing, you're not pushing it hard enough.
That's
You're
right.
not, you're not pushing that boundary enough, right? You're playing it too safe. Well, Gary, thanks for coming on today and sharing a little bit about your experience, your expertise in supply chain, and sharing some of your advice for folks that are operators, folks that are conference attendees and whatnot. I suppose that I will be seeing you there in Nashville here pretty soon.
Yeah, please join us. I mean, I know this is a world that's extremely difficult for those in the supply chain, because everything's expected to happen within 30 seconds. And, the world is now trained to, like, when I place that Amazon order, it should be in my door, like, is it there now? I mean, literally.
Yeah.
And that's a hard world to live in, but we've got such great people and talent across the space that we're able to meet a lot of those demands. It's a great thing. It's a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for having
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Have a good rest of your day.